This is episode 56 of the Life in Norway Show. Today we dive deep into a very important topic that is rarely discussed. That's the psychological side of moving to a new country. I'm joined by Gabriela Sirbu from migrationofemotion.com, where she writes about the challenges of living in a new country and offers workshops and individual help to people all over the world. Gabriela is originally from Romania but has lived in Norway for almost 20 years. So on today's show, we dive deep into some of the psychological challenges involved with moving to Norway. You can find out more information on everything we talk about today on the show notes page at lifeinnorway.net/podcast. Just look for episode 56. Happy listening. I'd like to welcome Gabriela Sirbu from migrationofemotion.com to the latest episode of the Life in Norway show. Gabriela, welcome.
Thank you, David. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Now, today we're going to dive into, for me, it's a fascinating topic. It's the psychology around immigration and moving to a new country. Much of this can apply to not just Norway, but anyone moving anywhere. So I know we're in for an interesting discussion. But before we dive into detail, let's hear a bit about you, get to know you a bit better. What brought you to Norway almost 20 years ago and what caused you to stay so long?
What brought me to Norway? It's a master degree in peace and conflict transformation at the University of Tromsø. So I came as a student in the first years of this, that the University of Tromsø was giving this degree in peace and conflict transformation. And it was something that was brought it to my attention because I wanted to do a master, but I wanted to be as broad as my bachelor degree, which was in journalism. So with this peace and conflict transformation, I could study pretty much whatever I wanted. So it was appealing at the time.
Now, you've spent a long time in Norway now, and over the last 2 decades, Norway has changed significantly in many ways. But of course, one of the biggest ways is that immigration has drastically increased over the last 20 years, partly through the European agreements and also through the various refugee crises over the years. How do you think Norwegian society has changed over that period of time that you've lived here? And has that change been for the better?
Well, I have to say that I live and always lived in the northern part of Norway, in Tromsø. And when it comes to immigration, this part of Norway has a little bit different history because here there has always been different culture. We have the Finnish, we have the Swedish, we have the Russians, there has always the Sami people. There has always been a little bit more multicultural in more aspects. When it comes to other type of immigrants, in Tromsø, the first ones came in 1988, opposite to Oslo, which is 1970s, which is some years, almost 20 years later. So when I say these years, I also think that Norway generally has a very young tradition of having immigrants. So it's a country that is not that used with immigrants in opposition with many other countries in the rest of the world, like if we compare with France or with Great Britain or America or Canada or the United States. So it's a fairly new process and a fairly new phenomenon in Norway, the immigration. So we meet people which are quite old now who probably never seen an immigrant before if we travel very far away in the countryside. So it's of course it has changed Norway in a way. But if I should tell some from my personal stories, I remember that I came as a student, and it was very difficult to find a place here to eat lunch because they were only having a few restaurants that they were open from 4:00 and that they would serve very expensive dinners. So if anyone would want to have lunch in town, it would be difficult to find a place. And that was until about 2010, I think, because I had a job a little bit further north than Tromsø, and I was away for about 2 years. And when I came back to Tromsø in 2010, I found places to have lunch. And that was exactly after the crisis in Europe from 2008, the economical crisis, and that brought up much more immigrants to the region. And it was also at the time a very big campaign of selling the beauty of Norway to bring tourists. So that also made that this economical field of tourism has increased. And that, of course, brought up much more immigrants. I remember that it came a huge group in 2011 up here. So now there are much more than they were when I came. I could have counted how many foreigners we were at the time. If it changed in Norway, of course, people have no choice. They meet someone foreign at work everywhere, or in the streets, or in the pubs, or at the restaurants. So we are quite many during time, and the locals don't really have a choice than to accept the situation. There are political rules that are a little bit above their heads. So this is how it is.
Let's talk a little bit about why people move. You've touched on various groups there, and when I moved to Norway, coincidentally in 2011, as you just mentioned, I used to say that people moved for the money, and then they stayed because they fell in love, or they moved because they'd fallen in love with somebody, and then they stayed for the money, a well-paid job, or so on. But it's not as simple as that, is it? There are many complex reasons why people migrate. And when we're talking about immigration, it's important to remember that there are many, many drivers for relocation.
Yes, if we stick to Norway, like the biggest category of immigrants in Norway is family reunion. It's the spouses, the wives, and the husbands that are getting married here, either with locals, either with previous immigrants who got the citizenship and they are here. The second biggest category is work immigrants. These are coming to work. The third category are refugees, and the fourth are students, and fifth are tourists or other people. So there are some feelings that I like to put behind all this. Of course, for family reunion would be love, right? People want to be with people they love. For work immigrants would be mostly the feeling of comfort, the comfort that can be bought with money in Norway. Now, there are people from West Europe and from Norway who travel other places for exactly the same reason, because probably they cannot buy with the money that they have here the same lifestyle that they could buy in another country. We have this holiday immigration where we have, or these people traveling to Thailand, for instance, because they can afford so much there. So this process of immigration is very complex. And the feeling of comfort that we can buy with money has a lot to say in it. And if we think about refugees, they are running for their lives. They want to have a safe life. So the feeling of safety is very important here. And for students, there are two things. One would be accomplishment, the feeling of accomplishment, or having a good degree, standing a little bit higher on the work market anywhere in the world, because having a degree at a foreign institution proves that you can adjust, you can function in a different language, you're able to write, you're able to communicate. But it's also the feeling of adventure, because you experience much more in being an exchange student in a semester, staying for 6 months or a year, than you can experience coming on holiday in a month. So we have all these feelings wrapped around the immigration process. And when we speak about feelings, not to forget Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in 2002, proved with a theory that says that pretty much everything we do emotional. We buy things emotional. So this is not something that is new, that we're driven by our emotions and how the the action are making us feel.
I want to ask you about language for the moment. Now, by this, I don't mean speaking Norwegian. I mean the words we use to describe relocation. And obviously, I'm coming at this from an English language perspective. But when I first moved here, I used the term expat. And without really knowing what that means, I think most people would see that as a very American and British way of describing an economic migrant, somebody that's moved for a job. And then maybe the word immigrant is almost seen as someone who's moving because they need a job, or they're looking for a job that they can't find in their homeland. And then when you add in refugees and asylum seekers into this as well, there's just this big mix of language that we use to describe relocation. Is that helpful or harmful to distinguish in this way?
I think it's difficult to run away from words. People are going to use the words that they feel comfortable with and the words that they have learned. Now, immigrant and expat and refugee. For refugees, it's a bit clear. Okay, they run away from war. That's clear. But expat and immigrant, this is a little bit, I wrote an article about this and called it like aesthetic of language. Because some people would like to call themselves expats because it sounds better. And others call themselves immigrants because not necessarily it sounds worse, but it doesn't sound, they don't have any relationship to the word. I would say that this word expat comes from, it's a historical word a little bit, because it comes from the time when the big powers in the world had colonies. And people were ordered to go abroad to represent their countries. So they were expatriates with a reason, with a political reason in a way, not necessarily economical. And then this word has extended to people who would simply have jobs abroad. And it's a little bit in the shadow somehow. It's a little bit foggy. So it's difficult to place it somehow. Because it can also be, and I also noticed that for immigrants, it's related with people that are coming from second or third world, and expat is related to first world countries. But we cannot deny that people from second and the third world are headhunted for their skill and go to work abroad because they are very good, or they are sent by their countries to work abroad. So for them can also apply the word expat. It's just, I don't think that people sit and think so much about it. It's just a foggy thing with words around.
Well, however someone identifies, whether it be expat, immigrant, or just or someone who's relocated, moving to a new country can be traumatic. It can be emotional. I've certainly been through all kinds of emotions in the 10 years that I've lived in Norway. I'm sure it's been the same for you. No two relocation experiences are the same. I think that's 100% accurate. You have your previous life, you have your family from wherever you were coming from, you have your new situation, friends, work. So no two situations will be alike. But is there a sort of cycle of emotions that people can expect to go through during a relocation? Just so if someone's listening to this show, they're thinking of moving to Norway or they're about to move, what can they expect from the mental health side of things?
First, what I've noticed, both in my own process and other people's processes I speak with, would be that first it's a lot of excitement because everything is new. And there is a little bit, it depends on the reason people are coming. It's also a little bit of fear of how people are going to cope regarding to the economical situation. But definitely the excitement of a new place, it's big in the first year. And then when people are starting to settle, somehow they come into the system. And they start seeing perhaps things they did not expect, that it may be difficult to get a job, that it may be difficult to get friends that are locals, that they see different kinds of difficulties. And if they don't manage to have a group of people to support them, then it can come some loneliness into the pictures. And people may feel alone. And here, of course, there are some coping strategies, but they require a lot of effort from each and every one of us who decide to live in a foreign country, because no one is going to make us happy. So we have to deal with everything pretty much alone, or we have to deal with asking for help. Friends, family, other people, talking on the phone. And then after this, when this second layer is done, and you feel like you have a grip on the life, you have the job, you have the contacts, you have the friends, it starts, I don't know, a feeling of comfort, because you feel settled. And after that, it can come a feeling of boredom. And you want to do something else, or to change the job, or to move abroad again. We see a lot in the world that people have lived in 7, 8, 10 countries. Why is that? Why is it that some people cannot just settle somewhere? So they feel this need of running away all the time until they find something they like, or they may never find something they like. So yes, it is a cycle which starts with excitement and goes to the feeling of wanting something new.
And obviously the time scale we're talking about here can vary hugely as well. People might go through those emotions within a year, or it might take 10 years to sort of complete that cycle.
Yeah, it's personal.
I'm wondering, you've mentioned a feeling of loss almost that people might experience after a while, maybe homesickness, or something that's not quite so quantifiable. Would you say that every person who relocates has that experience to some extent?
Yes, we always feel a kind of loss, and it's a loss of the familiarity we had before, because it's not easy to move from a place you know the language, you know the people, you know the system, to a place where you don't know anything. So it's a feeling of loss of something that you had, of something that you knew. It's the loss of the language, because most of us don't speak our native language. And that requires a lot of strength to be able to function in a different language. I've recently read some research that says that functioning in a different language than your own is like functioning in a different DNA. Because language influences our brain, and of course our brain influences all our body structure. So that is also a feeling of loss. And of course we lose friends, we lose family, we lose the food. Even though we find the ingredients and we make the same things in the place, it's not exactly the same. We lose the sense of atmosphere. I don't know if you notice, but every time we travel in the country where we have been brought up, there is something in the air that is very familiar. It's just there. You cannot actually touch it, but we feel it. So we lose all that, of course. And it's very, very individual, and each person feels it differently. For instance, I have noticed after living many years here in Norway that when I arrived in Tromsø in the airport, I would feel that smell of sausages, Narvesen.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly at one point I felt, oh, home. This is how home smells in Norway.
You've mentioned the word that I wanted to talk to you about next, right there, home. And I think this is a very evocative subject for anyone, perhaps not who's lived here for 10 or 20 years like we have, but certainly for just a couple of years. For you, I assume after 20 years, you very much consider Norway to be home. Yeah. When people ask me that question, I give the same answer, but I also say I haven't lost my original home. Britain is still home, and now Norway is also home. So I see this concept of multiple homes as rather than you're searching for a new home, you're sort of creating a second one. Do you think there's anything wrong with seeking out a new home, or how we come to refer to the word home? Any thoughts on that topic?
Well, there are many thoughts about this topic because home as a word, as a concept, means so much. I can tell you what I react on here in Norway. I get this question a lot around Christmas and Easter. Are you going home? And people asking me, they mean my birth country. And I say, I travel home every day because my home is here.
A term I came across not long after I moved to Norway was the term trailing spouse. I don't know the equivalent in other languages, but in certainly in English, and again, this is typically connected with the expat experience that we discussed earlier. A trailing spouse, the way I define it, is a husband, a wife, or a girlfriend, boyfriend that is following someone because that person has a job. Now that relocation experience can be very different. Do you come across many people in that situation? And if so, what are the challenges that they face?
Well, they come under the category of family reunion. So they are following their spouse. And the challenge they may have is that they are there because they choose the relationship and the happiness of the other person instead of their own. And many of them say with the head, I'm fine, it's good for us as a family. And some of them are fine with that. But others may have difficulties because if they left behind a good job and a good network of friends and a supportive family, they lose that. And they may find it difficult to accommodate in the new home. Of course, they are there to support the spouse that has both the job and the network, but who is supporting them, who is supportive for them. And it may be difficult to find new friends, so they need to reinvent themselves in a way. Either to find a new job, to find something to do, not to get bored. And in the same time, it can be also difficult to complain to people back home because in their eyes, this person lives the experience of a lifetime. Travel to this new, exciting country and not necessarily having to work. And how come you have a difficult time? Well, yes, because everything is unfamiliar. And it's also a question of effort. How much effort are they willing to put into learning the language, getting new friends, adjusting? And for how long are they going to be there? Are they going to be there for a while or for a long time? How much should they invest in the new life? So it's not easy for everybody. Of course, it's individual. Some people are more happier than others.
I think it's fair to say also that a group of people who typically find it easier to adjust to new situations is children, especially in terms of learning languages and making new friends. It's so much easier to make a new friend as an 8-year-old than it is as a 40-year-old. I think that's for sure. A sort of emerging group of people are the so-called third culture kids. And I've experienced this here in Trondheim. I know several groups or families that consist of, say, a native English father, a native Spanish-speaking mother, and they've both moved to Norway independently. They've met here. They have kids here. So the kids are growing up Norwegian. They're growing up trilingual. They're speaking English and Spanish at home, and they're learning Norwegian at school. Are there any issues around this relatively new structure of family? Like, for instance, is there an issue with the children and the sense of identity with this mixed upbringing, or do you see that only as a positive thing for their future?
It's not necessarily. Again, it's very individual, and it also depends on how well integrated the parents are. and how much are they willing to participate to the life of the kid, how much are they willing to drive the kid around everywhere in all the activities and to let it go to parties and all this children stuff that is done around children. I assume that I'm not assuming, I know in the childhood, when they grow up, there may not be any issues, but when they grow up as adults, it may come. There may come some questions about who am I, and what am I doing, and where do I belong. It will be a question of belonging, and the group of friends counts a lot. So the bigger the group of friends and how supportive they are, it's the better. Because sometimes children need their friends more than they need their parents, because we have all this generational gap. When parents do not understand the world of the children from today, and it's very different when we have all this technology and all these gadgets, which is very different from the time when we grow up. So yes, they are going to have some different issues than we have as being a first generation immigrants. But this is in the situation where children are born and brought up here. When children have no say in the matter, and when they are just dragged along because the family decided, the parents decided, that may be a little bit more traumatic, even if the children are learning the language faster and they get friends faster. It will be because they leave everything they know behind, and children need stability much more than we adults need. We also need it, but for children, it's much more important. And dislocating children, it can be much more traumatic than for adults, simply because they are not getting to choose. They may, if they are lucky, they have parents who ask them, who take them into the decision making, make them part of the decision making. But if their parents never ask them anything and they just say we move and that's it, it may be difficult.
We've mentioned your website a couple of times now, Gabriela, migrationofemotion.com, where you offer therapy or support services, but you also do a lot of writing about these issues, exactly these issues that we've been talking about. So I'll include links to some of the most relevant articles in the show notes that people can dig into in a bit more detail. But given your background and the things you've studied and the work you've done, what drew you into offering support services for this kind of work?
Well, the studies I took at the Norwegian Gestalt Institute, there is a requirement that in the third year, you're supposed to start a practice.
Okay.
And I did that, and slowly people found out about me. And since I am an immigrant, I started focusing on this issue because I can use a lot my own experience. And in Gestalt therapy, we work a lot with being present and being, being who we are. And the experience of the therapist, it's very important because it's real for the people we work with, and that counts a lot. And the chemistry that is between people. It's best if you work with someone that you function together with, that you like, where the chemistry matches. And I've noticed that, yes, I am preferred by immigrants because I have this experience.
On that note, so obviously we can't talk about individual people that you work with, but from an aggregate perspective, what sort of issues do you find are people coming to you with? What are the most common things?
Do not understand the Norwegian society.
Okay.
Do not understand those ones who are from here, from Norway. I have others abroad as well. But those from Norway, it's difficult to understand the codes of the Norwegian society. And there I work a lot with behavior, because when we have the behavior it was needed for us to develop, in the system that we grew up. Either it was a democracy, or it was a dictatorship, or a war zone, or whatever. And we carry that with us. And sometimes that doesn't fit with the calm and the quiet Norwegian society, because there are different cultural codes which are not written. People just know them because they have always been here. And that I find it, that many people find it difficult. How do I understand this? What do I do now? Why is it that it is like that? So, and because many of them want so badly to integrate and to adjust, and they don't know what they're doing wrong. So I work a lot with this, with unlearning what people have learned in their home countries and relearning new ways of behavior. Because you don't need to have a diagnosis to speak with a therapist, with someone trained. You just need to have some issues. You have a difficult time, and then you go and speak to someone like me, and it goes better after a while. And with the other people that I work with abroad, loneliness comes up in the picture. It's that layer we talked about in the beginning. When you are settled, you have the job, but you don't really manage to make friends. You don't really find the chemistry with the people around, and people are feeling lonely. So that is something I also work with.
So is this about giving people the tools, the psychological tools to work through these issues themselves?
Yeah.
Or is there an element of teaching here as well? It sounds like you're almost taking a mentor role for some kind of people.
Sometimes it depends, but what I notice is that I work a lot with words, with rephrasing things, with looking at them from a different perspective. What if we call angry people engaged people, for instance? Because anger will always be in the picture. At the same time, it sounds better if we call these people engaged. So I work a lot with rephrasing, with people, for instance, who grew up in radical regimes, or with strict parents, for instance, will have a tendency to say always, all the time, everybody. So making a big picture of an entire thing that it's extremely bad. But it's not really true. Only few people or some people. So I work a lot with these small words, which totally shift the perspective on the situation they are in. But it's not easy to see it. It's not easy to see it, because you notice always that people talk and you ask, why did you say that? I don't know, I just said it. But it has such a much deeper meaning, those small words that we don't even notice that we say.
I wonder, from your experience, have you seen any patterns in the nationality of people that tend to struggle more with a relocation, or that adapt more easily, or are there any patterns like that? So someone coming from America versus someone coming from Eastern Europe, are there differences there?
It depends a lot on the motivation. And it also depends on the economical situation. Because, for instance, people who are going to be caught up in the first level of the Maslow pyramid, which is the survival, they are not going to think too much about these small things we work with. But when people get to have all the material comfort they need, then all these issues are coming up, because they start being much more attentive to the small details. So it doesn't really have to do with the nationality, it has to do with the economical standard.
I see.
Because it's difficult to work with emotions if you are worried that you are not going to have a job tomorrow. If the biggest emotion is hunger, or the biggest emotion is fear of not having a job, it's difficult to work with different type of emotions. So when all this is settled, all the other ones are coming up. It's a natural process. I don't know if people think about, but the most common example I can give, it's, for instance, when we take holiday. So we had a very busy time, we worked a lot, and we take a holiday and we get a cold. So suddenly we go from driving in the 5th speed to the 1st speed. And of course the body says, yay, now I have time to do whatever I want. I'm going to catch a cold. So it's the same. It's a little bit the same process.
I don't know if you work with anyone who hasn't yet relocated, but a lot of my listeners, and I see this from the download statistics, they're not from Norway. And I hear from many people who have taken a holiday here or they have family here and they're planning to move and they just want to know, they want to absorb every piece of information about Norway possible. I think many times an issue that these people have is that their impression of what Norway is going to be like is very different from the reality, especially if they've been here on holiday and they've toured the fjords and so on. From your perspective, what would be a piece of advice or several pieces of advice that you would give to somebody who hasn't yet made the move but is planning on moving to Norway? How can they best prepare themselves to deal with the change that is to come?
Okay, what I would suggest would be for people to be aware of the reputation the country they are coming from has in Norway.
Oh, that's interesting.
How is your country seen from outside? What people from Norway know about your country? And expect that they don't know that much. And be prepared to tell the story of your country, to tell the story of your language, to tell the story of some political system, to be aware of that and be able to tell it, to be aware of, of defending yourself in case your country has a less positive reputation. Because sometimes a less good reputation can be placed on the shoulders of one person that comes from the country with the bad reputation. And it's good for people to be prepared to defend their country, but also defend themselves, because one person cannot be responsible for the whole 1,000 years of history and political systems. So that is important for people to know, to be prepared how to speak about, to have the words. Another thing would be to be able to distinguish between hard skills and soft skills and to speak about them. What are my hard skills? My profession, my diplomas, what I know how to do, and my soft skills. How am I as a personality? I find that very few foreigners learn how to speak about their soft skills. It's a very difficult question that you get in job interviews. In all jobs interviews in Norway, you get the question, speak a little bit about yourself. And people start talking about their hard skills, and actually the answer expected is to speak about you as a person. And that is very important for people who come from outside to know. What else should be? Okay, to know about them, to know about yourself. How do you like to work, and how do you work best? Do you work well alone or in teams or both? If you work in team, how is it for you to carry a free passenger? How do you feel about that? It's very important for you to know in your heart and to know that this may happen, and you have to take responsibility for that. And another thing, important thing, I think, it's what kind of boss would you like to work for? How would you like to be treated in your work environment? And again, I find that people don't really think about this. They think, okay, I just get paid and that's it. No, work environment is extremely important in Norway, and I find that very, very few foreigners think about it. Because very few foreigners think about that they spend 8 or 10 hours at work, 8 8 hours in Norway, and that is 1/3 of our life. Of course, we need to have a comfortable work environment. And that is important to know about the person that wants to move. What is it that they really want, and how do they react in different situations? So basically, to know yourself. This would be my advice.
Some great pieces of advice there, Gabriela. Thank you so much. And, I think one of the frustrations in doing a relatively short podcast interview for you and for me as well is that we can't really dive into the real details here. There's so much more to talk about around these topics. So I would encourage everyone to go, whether you have an interest in therapy or coaching session, or you have no interest at all, you will still find Gabriela's writings of interest. Of that, I am sure.
I offered the first session for free, so I'm available to talk for an hour.
That's great. And that's migrationofemotion.com. You'll also find some articles that I've picked out that I think are especially worth reading on the show notes page, which you'll find at lifeinnorway.net/podcast. Gabriela, before you go, I will ask you the 3 questions I ask every guest on the Life in Norway show. So some quick answers, please. After 20 years, what is the best thing about living in Norway?
The nature and the social system, which is very friendly when you find out how to deal with it.
And the most challenging thing?
The winter and the law of Jante.
The winter in the north, I expect, is
6 to 8 months.
Yeah, the reason behind that answer, certainly. And finally, your favorite place in Norway, whether that's a whole city or a secluded spot somewhere hidden away.
I have 2 favorite places. One is my home, where I live, and the other one is on the top of a mountain, about 45 minutes drive from Tromsø. The mountain is called Bruna, and it has this breathtaking view from the top. So it's a mountain that I climb every single year because the view is worth it every single year.
Fantastic. Gabriela, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been really interesting.
You're welcome.